The night my daughter-in-law stood up at my son's engagement party and announced, in front of 60 people, that I wasn't welcome at the wedding, I didn't say a word. I picked up my jacket, helped my wife with her coat, and we walked out into the November cold. People told me later I should have caused a scene. My brother called me a coward. My sister said she would have flipped the dessert table. But I've been a contractor in this city for 31 years. I've dealt with inspectors, subcontractors, city permits, clients who change their minds at the last minute. I've learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one. I just needed time. My son's name is Callum. He's 32 now. He was always a good kid, patient, thoughtful, the kind of boy who would sit with his grandmother for hours just talking. When he was 12 and his grandfather passed, Callum was the one who noticed his grandmother wasn't eating. He started making her tea every morning before school without being asked. I watched him do that for 3 months until she was okay again. That's the kind of person he was. I don't know exactly when things started to shift. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe I just didn't want to see it. He met Brianna at a work conference in Calgary 4 years ago. She works in marketing and she's sharp. I'll give her that. Polished. When Callum first brought her home to Barrie, she shook my hand firmly and complimented the trim work in our front hallway. My wife, Loretta, made her famous chicken pot pie and Brianna ate 2 helpings and asked for the recipe. I thought, okay, this one's genuine. The first sign I missed was small. We'd been planning a trip up to Muskoka for the long weekend. The whole family, same cabin we rent every August. Callum asked if Brianna could join. Of course, I said, the more the better. But when Loretta called Callum that Thursday to confirm what groceries everyone was bringing, Brianna got on the line and said she'd already booked a hotel because the cabin situation wasn't really her thing. She'd booked a hotel in Gravenhurst for the 2 of them, without mentioning it to us. Callum apologized, said she was introverted, needed her space. I let it go. The second sign was harder to dismiss. Christmas 2 years ago. We do Christmas at our house, always have. My mother started it, Loretta kept it going. My daughter Stephanie drives in from Ottawa with her husband and the kids. My sister and her family come over. It's the one time of year the whole house is full and loud, and exactly the way it should be. Brianna sat in the corner of the living room on her phone for most of Christmas Eve. When Loretta's sister tried to include her in the card game, Brianna said she didn't really play games. She said it pleasantly enough, but she didn't try to find another way to connect. She just went back to her phone. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Loretta said to me, "She doesn't like us." I told her she was reading too much into it. Brianna was just shy. New family situations are hard for some people. I said it with enough confidence that Loretta nodded and didn't push it. But I didn't fully believe it myself. The engagement happened last spring. Callum called me on a Saturday morning, and his voice had that particular brightness in it that you only hear when someone's genuinely happy about something. He told me he'd proposed the night before at a restaurant on the water in Collingwood. I congratulated him. I told him I was proud of him. I meant it. Whatever reservations I had about Brianna, she made my son happy, and that counted for something. The engagement party was in July at Brianna's parents' place in Oakville. Her father, Curtis, is a commercial real estate developer. Nice house. Big property. The kind of backyard that makes you quietly calculate the square footage. We got there a little late because of traffic on the 401. Loretta had brought a gift and a card, and she'd spent time on both. When we arrived, Brianna barely glanced at us before turning back to a group of her friends. Callum hugged us and got us drinks and introduced us around. It was fine. A bit formal. Not warm, but fine. The speeches started after dinner. Curtis spoke about Brianna, got a little emotional. Callum spoke about the proposal, and then Brianna stood up. I wasn't watching her closely at first. I was watching Callum watching her, and he looked happy, proud, and then she said it. She talked about their future. She talked about the wedding they were planning, and then she said, and I remember this word for word because I've replayed it many times. She said that she and Callum had made a decision together, and that decision was that their wedding was going to be about their future, not about past family drama. She said that anyone who had created tension in the relationship wouldn't be there on their day, and then she looked directly at Loretta and me. 60 people in that backyard, all of them suddenly very quiet. Callum said nothing. I put my glass down on the table next to me, very carefully. Loretta's hand found my arm. I covered her hand with mine. I stood up and I said, "Congratulations to you both," and we left. We drove back to Barry in silence for about 20 minutes. Then Loretta started to cry, not loudly. She doesn't cry loudly. She just went very quiet, and the tears ran down her face, and she looked out the window at the dark fields and the highway lights. I didn't say anything comforting right away, because there was nothing comforting to say. My wife had just been publicly humiliated at her son's engagement party. She'd been told, in front of 60 strangers, that she wasn't welcome at her own son's wedding. I'd let it happen. I hadn't stood up. I hadn't defended her. That one sits with me still. When we got home, I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. Loretta asked me what I thought past family drama meant, because she genuinely couldn't think of anything she'd done. Neither could I. Loretta had been nothing but kind to Brianna. Consistently, patiently, quietly kind. Even when it wasn't returned. We went to bed. We didn't sleep much. The next morning, Callum called. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known Brianna was going to say that. I asked him, "Did you agree with it?" Long pause. He said things had been complicated. He said Brianna felt like his family didn't accept her. I asked him when specifically she hadn't been accepted. Another pause. He couldn't give me an example. I told him I loved him and I was going to need some time. I hung up. Here's the thing about being 57 years old. You have perspective. Not wisdom necessarily. I've made plenty of stupid decisions, but perspective. You've seen enough people burn their relationships down and regret it. You've also seen enough people tolerate things they shouldn't have and regret that too. You learn to tell the difference between a situation where patience is a virtue and a situation where patience is just weakness in disguise. I called my lawyer that week. Not for anything dramatic. I just needed to understand where things stood with the company. Callum had been working with me at Faulkner & Associates Construction for 6 years. He was listed as a partial stakeholder in 2 of our subsidiary contracts. Something I'd set up 3 years earlier because I was thinking about succession, about handing him the business eventually. I'd wanted him to have a stake, to feel ownership. My lawyer, a careful man named Stephen who's been doing my contracts for 15 years, walked me through the details. He said if I wanted to restructure, it was possible. He didn't ask me why. He just laid out the options. I didn't make any decisions that week, or the next. I wanted to be calm when I decided anything. I didn't want anger driving the car. Callum came to our house about 3 weeks after the engagement party. He came alone. Brianna hadn't sent a message, hadn't called. Callum sat at the same kitchen table where Loretta and I had sat the night we got home, and he apologized again. This time he looked more tired, like he'd been having difficult conversations in the weeks between. Loretta made coffee. She's gracious that way. It's not something I could always do, just keep offering coffee, but she did. Callum said he was working on things with Brianna. He said she'd had a difficult relationship with her own father's first wife, and it had given her preemptive anxiety about in-laws. I'm not dismissing that. I know complicated family histories create real patterns. But I also know that whatever her history was, Loretta hadn't caused it. Loretta shouldn't have been standing in that backyard crying while the guests pretended to look elsewhere. I told Callum 3 things. I told him I loved him, and that would never change. I told him his mother deserved a direct apology. Not a note, not an explanation about Brianna's anxiety, but a genuine face-to-face apology from Brianna herself. And I told him that until that happened, we needed space. He nodded. He didn't push back. I think somewhere in him he knew I was right. The apology took 2 months. In those 2 months, a few things happened. I quietly restructured the subsidiary contracts. Callum's name was removed from the stakeholder documents. It wasn't punitive, or maybe it was, a little. Mostly, it was practical. I wasn't going to build something for a future that I wasn't sure looked the way I'd thought it would. I let Stephen handle it. He did it cleanly. Callum would have had to look specifically to notice, and for weeks he didn't. Then one Tuesday morning he called me. His voice was different. Flatter. "You changed the contracts," he said. "I did," I said. "Why?" "Because I'm not sure yet what we're building," I said. "When I am, we can revisit it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is this because of Brianna?" I said. "It's because I have to make business decisions that reflect the actual situation. And the actual situation is that I don't know what our family looks like right now." He didn't say anything else. He hung up. That afternoon, I went out to a job site in Innisfil. We were doing a full renovation on a century home, pulling out all the original plumbing, replastering, the works. I walked the site, talked to my foreman, checked the progress. There's something grounding about physical work, about seeing what's actually been built and what still needs doing. I drove home thinking about Callum, about the 12-year-old who made his grandmother tea every morning, about the 32-year-old who stood in a backyard full of people and said nothing while his wife told his mother she wasn't welcome. I don't think Callum is a bad person. I think he was in love, and he made accommodations that went too far, 1 degree at a time, until he was somewhere he wouldn't have chosen if you'd asked him at the start. That happens to good people. About 2 weeks after the phone call about the contracts, Brianna reached out to Loretta, a text first, asking if she could come over. Loretta showed it to me and asked what I thought. I said it was Loretta's call entirely. Loretta slept on it and said yes. I wasn't there. I went to my brother's place in Barrie that afternoon deliberately. That conversation needed to be between them. I wasn't going to supervise it or hover. Loretta is a capable woman who doesn't need me managing her life. When I came home around 8 that evening, Loretta was in the kitchen. She didn't say anything right away. She poured us both some wine, and we sat on the back porch. She cried, Loretta said eventually. Yeah? She said she's been awful. She used that word. Said she recognized it, and she didn't have a good excuse for it. I asked, do you believe her? Loretta thought about it for a long time. I believe she believes it right now, she said. I don't know about the rest yet. That's Loretta. She's precise about what she knows and what she doesn't. It's one of the things I've loved about her for 34 years. We talked for a long time that night, about what we wanted, about what kind of relationship was possible with Callum and Brianna, realistically. Not the version you hope for in the abstract. The Sunday dinners, the grandchildren, the easy warmth, but the real version, the version where trust has been broken and has to be rebuilt brick by brick and might not end up looking the same as before. We decided we were willing to try, not to go back to normal, because normal had never actually been great. To go forward to something better if both of them were actually willing to do the work. Callum called me the following Sunday. He said Brianna had told him about the visit. He said he was sorry, again, but this time it was different. He wasn't apologizing on her behalf or explaining her context. He was apologizing for himself. For standing in that backyard and saying nothing. For every time he'd watched his mother be ignored or excluded and chosen the easier road. Those words cost him something. I could hear it. I told him, that's the apology I needed. The wedding is still on. It's in September, up near Huntsville. We're invited, genuinely, on proper printed invitations that arrived in the mail with our names spelled correctly. I'm not going to pretend everything is resolved. Trust doesn't work that way. You don't have a hard conversation and then arrive on the other side, healed. It's slower than that and messier, and there will probably be things that come up again. But I'll tell you what I know. I know my son is trying. I know Loretta walked back into our kitchen that evening, after Brianna left, and looked tired but also lighter, like something that had been pressing on her for a long time had let up just slightly. I know that the contracts are still restructured, and I will not be rushing to change that. Actions matter more than words, and I'm watching the actions. And I know that the night we drove home from Oakville in the dark, with Loretta crying beside me, I thought, I'm not going to blow this up. I'm not going to become someone I don't recognize. I'm going to handle this the way I handle everything that matters, carefully, quietly, and without giving anyone a reason to say I was the problem. That restraint cost me something too. I won't pretend otherwise. But it also left me with something. My son is still in my life. My wife is still standing, and we're going to be there in September, in Muskoka, watching Callum get married, on our terms, with our dignity intact. Whatever comes next, we built it right.